Mike W.T. Allen is described as a compositional tour de force by Discorder magazine, fresh, infectiously rhythmic and warming by Vancouver Classical Music, and loud and weird by his friends. Mike has been stubbornly forging his own pathway through the Vancouver music scene since graduating in 2014 with a degree in composition from Capilano University's jazz program, where he studied with the likes of John Korsrud, Bradshaw Pack, Brad Turner, and Lisa Miller. Mike has had compositions of his performed, debuted, or commissioned by the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, Redshift Music, the Hard Rubber Orchestra, Ecstatic Waves, the Mackenzie Jones Big Band, Ontario's Royal Military College Concert Band, and international debuts and performances by Larynous and Jerk in the Can. In addition to his serious art music work, Mike composes, plays with, produces, and records music with a number of his own groups and other artists around Vancouver, headlining festivals, touring, and producing albums over a vast range of styles, as well as producing soundtracks for local award-winning films and commercials. Mike also leads the 20-piece jazz metal experimental big band Space Elevator, which has been described as one of the most awe-inspiring demonstrations of musical prowess that I've ever experienced by Discorder magazine, and a showcase for some of the best musicians Vancouver has to offer, an exhibit of Allen's compositional genius by the Capilano Courier. Here is my interview with Mike W.T. Allen. I'm the host of the Redshift Radio podcast, Adrian Verdejo, podcasting from my home studio in Vancouver, BC, on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. Well, Mike, thank you for joining me today. It's nice to see you in person.
Yeah, of course. Nice to see you in person as well, instead of over a Zoom call like we usually see each other.
Yeah, the semi-annual almost board of directors meeting for Redshift. Yeah,
is it even annual? It's usually annual.
I think there's some initiative to try to get this a little bit more kind of like a proper regular schedule. Yeah. Hopefully this is the year.
Yeah.
But
fingers crossed. We'll see.
Yeah. Anyways, thanks again for stopping by, and again, we kind of kicked it down the road, so I appreciate you kind of being flexible. And I know we have a lot to talk about because you have a show coming up. You mentioned you've been very busy with both with your band and composing, and so many other things in life as well.
Lots of stuff going on.
Lots going on, But maybe we can just kind of go back to the beginning.
All right.
As far as your background with music and how you were introduced to music, at what age, and if you come from a musical family, or if there was a kind of specific moment you remember when you were kind of like, I'm going to be a musician.
Yeah, I grew up around music. My dad is a professional jazz drummer who's played with a bunch of people, so there was always music in the house. And then my mom is just a fan of anything strange and weird. When she was growing up, she was on the board of directors for like the Winnipeg, some strange dance festival they used to have out there. And so from my dad's side of the family, I was always getting the sort of how to be a professional musician side. And then from my mom's side, it was always the, hey, here's another weird thing you should check out. I was actually talking with a friend recently. She was asking me why I always enjoy strange music. And I think one of the key moments for me was growing up as a little kid, as a little boy, I loved dinosaurs.
Oh, yeah.
And my parents put me in front of the classic Disney film Fantasia.
Oh, yeah.
Which is...
The axes and...
For sure. All a bunch of incredible classical music in there. But my favorite segment was one with the dinosaurs, because it's dinosaurs. And that happened to be set to Stravinsky's Rite of Spring.
Uh-huh.
So I ended up watching this segment over and over and over again, because I just wanted to see, the T-Rex fighting the Stegosaurus. But what I was maybe subconsciously being introduced to was this whole world of avant-garde music and strange stuff like that.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so I think that really sort of set a foundation that I wasn't even aware of at the time.
Yeah.
And then growing up, I joined the school band at, I think, 10 years old. I really wanted to play drums, but my mom was like, "No, you're not playing drums. I don't want that in my basement." Mm-hmm. So I settled on saxophone as a sort of second choice.
Yeah, right. Sure.
But ended up sticking with it. And then I remember getting into high school, getting into like my teenage years. And I think I was around maybe 17 when I started my first sort of real band. It was like a ska band because, you know, I played saxophone and I realized, whoa, you can play saxophone in like a real band, not just like your school ensemble or like a jazz band or whatever.
Yeah.
So I started this ska band with some friends, and I remember we played our first show, and it blew my mind to look out into the audience and see people enjoying music that we had created. You know, and it wasn't just a bunch of parents politely sitting for their kids student band concert. It was actually a real show with other bands and with an audience. And I don't even think we were in a club. I think it was like a youth center or something.
Sure, yeah.
But I remember that feeling of looking out into the audience, seeing a reaction from people and going, oh my God, you can do that? You can just make music and people will enjoy it? That's amazing.
Totally. And so, okay, if I could guess, was this around like kind of 2000 or late 90s, around that kind of ska revival, punk rock kind of mix? Yeah,
yeah, sure. It would have been sort of the mid 2000s.
Mid 2000s, sure.
Yeah,
well, that was a good time to be a horn player.
It was a great time for sure. It was a great time to be a ska musician.
Yeah. And definitely you have a lot of hard rock, punk, and metal influence in your music, both as a composer and in your current band. Was this a time where you're exposed to a lot of that kind of underground, like the music in the punk rock music of the time, the hard rock music?
Yeah, I mean, I remember going to shows where the bill would be like a punk band and then a ska band and then like a weird slam poet and then like a heavy metal musician, you know, ending off the night. And it blew me away to see so many different styles of music all being represented in one night. And I think, again, it's one of those things where I wasn't aware of it at the time, but it was really sort of subconsciously creating this idea of like anything goes in music. You can do anything. Yeah. I mean, even from the band I was playing in where we called ourselves a ska band, but it would be like funk music, punk rock, soul, just sort of take some guitars, take some horns, shove them together and see what happens.
No, totally, yeah.
And it just, created this kind of, there's no rules in music. You can just do anything with anything, and if it's good, it's good.
Did you grow up in Winnipeg or Vancouver, or you said your family had?
My mom grew up in Winnipeg. I grew up in Vancouver.
Vancouver, okay, cool. Yeah. So you were around that scene at that time in BC as well.
Yeah.
And were there some early bands or kind of groups of musicians you were touring with, and you kind of maybe did some gigs with regularly or after that?
My first sort of real band was this group called the Ivy League Brawlers. We didn't do too much outside of Vancouver. I think we went to Victoria a couple times.
Yeah.
After that was sort of like this weird sort of circus rock electro thing where everyone dressed up like clowns and everyone had a bunch of effects pedals on all their instruments.
Yeah.
That band was touring a little more. We went down to the States a few times. And then, I mean, since around then is when I went into school for music up at Capilano and started a bunch of bands up there, ranging from sort of like free jazz to like weird, punk noise jazz bands, and started playing with everyone. I had an early lesson with a great Vancouver saxophone player named Tom Keenlyside, who he gave me one of the best lessons of my life, which was just to say yes to everything.
Sure.
Even if you only kind of know how to do something, just say yes, figure out how to do it, and then do it.
That's and what they said, fake it until you make it, right?
Exactly. Right? I'm still faking it.
I think we all are.
Yeah, we're all just faking it. One day we'll make it. But that idea of just sort of doing as much as you can, just saying yes to everything, really stuck with me, and has really sort of shaped who I've become as a musician, as a composer, because now someone can say, hey, do you want to come play clarinet on this weird classical gig? And I'll say yes. Someone will say, hey, do you want to come play Barry sax with our funk band? And I'll say yes. And hey, do you want to write a string quartet for this film? And I'll say yes. And every time that you say yes, you end up learning a new skill. And now that's something that's in your wheelhouse. That's something that you can work with. So through the years, I've just said yes to more and more and more things. And now it's to the point where I've got my foot in a lot of different doors. Sometimes I'm just being touring rock and roll saxophone guy. Sometimes I'm being avant-garde composer guy. Sometimes I'm big band leader guy, and it's different all the time, which I love.
Yeah. Keeps you on your toes and
keeps me on my toes.
Definitely learn, pick up a bit of something from everybody you play with too.
Exactly.
Like you really your collaborators kind of shape who you become as a musician, right?
Yeah.
I know CAP has such a great reputation in the jazz program and really high level and maybe a bit traditional in its approach. Were you versed in kind of the standards going into the school? Did you catch up? Did you really get specifically into like bebop and jazz, or was it kind of like a rite of passage? How did you fit in there? Because I remember going there as a classical student, but I knew the level and the expectation for the jazz students was always very high.
Yeah, they definitely push you really hard, which is great. But they can also be a little bit sort of church of bebop.
Yeah.
I've heard in the past few years that they've actually become a lot more open, which is great. I think some people have been sort of voicing some concerns about, hey, like bebop isn't the only music out there. So that's great. I'm really happy to hear that. I've been hearing some amazing musicians coming out of there these days. But when I was there, it was definitely a bit of the church of bebop. And I had some teachers up there that were great, really supported me in whatever I was doing. But I wasn't there to become a bebop jazz sax player. And so it was a little bit of an uphill battle. But at the same time, I think that really, it was an uphill battle in the sense of, okay, you want to do this weird stuff, but if you're going to do this weird stuff, you have to be good at it. You have to do this weird stuff that you're doing as well as can possibly be done. And I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Really appreciate just being in this situation where the teachers were just pushing me to do what I was doing at the top of my ability.
Yeah. And I think, whether or not you become like a strict jazz player, and for my experience also as an educator, like I don't expect my students to become classical guitar performers, all of them, even most of them, but I think that there's definitely a benefit of going through a program and if nothing else, just kind of having deadlines, having expectations, and kind of seeing what's out there as far as the level, and probably as a working musician, you have to kind of have a thick skin. Yeah. You have to be able to roll the punches, right? And you have to be able to kind of be on your toes most of the time.
Yeah.
So after you graduated in CAP, obviously you were out there kind of gigging a lot, and as a kind of performing musician / kind of budding composer, what was it that really kind of sparked your composition mindset? That you wrote some early pieces, or was there a specific like classical composer influence that beyond the dinosaurs and Stravinsky?
It's all dinosaurs, man. It's all about the dinosaurs.
I'm wondering how the dinosaurs kind of, if this is like a motif in your music, or did it just sort of like a youthful inspiration maybe? But anyways, I was going to ask about composers and what drove you into like so-called classical music.
Let's see, where did the composer... I mean, I was always writing things, even before I went into music school. I remember back in my ska days, I think I wrote and fully notated out an entire album's worth of material that never got played by the band, because I think I brought it to one rehearsal, and then about a few weeks later, we broke up.
Okay.
But even then, I was still notating things out.
Yeah.
For me, it's just always been about experimentation.
Yeah.
Even before notation, I was messing around in that program GarageBand and just putting loops together and saying, what happens if I take this tabla beat and put it underneath a funk guitar and just throwing loops on top of each other like that.
Yeah.
So it's always been experimentation for me, and I think, geez, where would the classical element have come
Well,
in?
I remember when I first met you, Mike, we did, I was doing a gig with Redshift, and we'd kind of rented out the Orpheum space.
Yes.
As a group of composers, part of a collective, and maybe you can remind me what the collective was called. And that was my first introduction to your music as a composer, so-called, officially like a classical composer, kind of, and I was really impressed with the piece. I remember it was a very understated kind of cell-based minimalist piece, and really beautiful, and really kind of used also the space, pretty effectively in that, like, we're kind of scattered around the area, right?
Was that with Ecstatic Waves?
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Ecstatic Waves.
Yeah, Ecstatic Waves. That's Chris Blaber's collective. I'm not sure if he's still running it, but that was fun. He was putting on just a different concert every month. There was always a call for scores. He would just ask his friends, just say, hey, you're a weird classical composer friend of mine. Do you want to write for this group? And it was always open instrumentation.
Yeah.
And just again, sort of that anything goes kind of attitude.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're talking about notation. Like, I think nowadays, you can make an argument. It's sort of like, it doesn't have to be the be all end all of the composition process. It could be just kind of like the last step so people have something to read off of,
Yeah.
But like, the idea of using GarageBand and loops and, just experimenting with sound, something that we all have access to, and it's kind of open the door, right? It's like, you don't have to go to, do 2 degrees in composition necessarily. You can actually go out there and make music. You can just kind of like, start doing it, right?
Yeah.
I think that DIY approach is really cool and really inspiring.
I think the DIY thing is amazing because it really opens up the doors to whatever anyone wants to do.
Yeah.
And I think if you can get people excited about music, if you can get people excited about creating music, then they're going to create music. If you're sitting there saying, oh, you're not a composer until you show me what you've notated out on the page, it's just going to make people maybe not want to pursue that.
And I'm sure like you jammed in the early days and still with a lot of readers and non-readers, right? So it's like finding a language that you can meet in between is like actually a rare skill, I think,
Yeah. It really helps. Some of my favorite musicians, both locally and just in history, had no idea about music theory. Have no idea, what they're doing if they were to sit down with a pad of staff paper and a pencil.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important sort of mental block to get past. I have a ton of friends that really will get down on themselves because they say, oh, I don't understand theory. I don't know this. I don't know that. And I'm saying, what are you talking about? You write some of the coolest music I've heard.
Yeah. And feel is something that you just can't learn, really. Like, it's like that's something that some people are just born with or acquire just on the job, right?
Yeah. You can't notate feel.
No, that's true. Yeah.
You can't just like write out a drum groove and say, well, I mean, you could write out a drum groove and then just say, make it feel good.
Yeah, funky.
Funky.
So you said you picked up a lot of skills on the job and you are a multi-instrumentalist, but you identify as a sax player mainly, right?
Yeah, that's what I usually get hired for. Yeah. That's probably my main instrument.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm all, again, it's one of those just, I've said yes to so many things. So I mean, saxophone, flute, clarinet, oboe, piano.
Yeah.
I can get around a guitar and a bass and stuff, but sax is my main instrument.
And so you play all the ranges of sax? So you seem to play a lot of Barry mainly, is that right?
Or, again, it's sort of just, that's what people ask me to play.
Okay, cool.
I went through jazz school on Barry sax.
Yeah.
I have a working theory that most of my career is based off the fact that I own a Barry sax.
Yeah.
And it's not a rare instrument, but it's, not as many people have it.
It's a niche for sure.
It's a little bit of a niche.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, so, if you own a Barry sax, you get hired for Barry sax gigs.
Oh, cool.
Especially earlier before I had sort of established myself. I would just get hired because, hey, our Barry player can't make this gig. Who else has one of those? Okay, we'll get Mike.
Yeah, right, sure.
And which is great for me because I got a lot of gigs out of that.
Absolutely, yeah. And like kind of percentage-wise, how are you splitting your time between like freelance gigging, sax / multi-instrumentalist, composer, arranger? We're going to talk about this production you have coming up as well, and obviously your work with the band. Like, do you have as much time these days to do freelance gigging, or are you kind of more into the band and composition world?
It really shifts throughout the year. Like my summers are this past summer, I was fully just touring all summer. I was out on the road for almost 3 or 4 months straight, and I remember getting home at the end of that stretch, sitting down at my computer, opening up Sibelius. And I forgot how to use it.
All the shortcut keys.
I was going, what's the shortcut for going back to this? How do I notate this right? Okay. And but then on the flip side of that, right now while I'm preparing for this concert at the end of March, I've been almost exclusively just holed up in my room for hours and hours on end, until 4 or 5 in the morning every night, just writing and writing and writing. And someone says, hey, do you want to come to this jam? And I say no. Hey, do you want to come do this? And I have to say no just because
Just time.
Yeah, just time. But it's sort of that mentality of just saying yes to as many things as I possibly can.
Yeah, sure.
I love to be busy.
Yeah.
I know in my own life that I really I thrive off of being busy and being just a little bit panicked all the time.
Yeah, it's true. You have to ride that edge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you don't want to get too comfortable in our profession.
Yeah.
In that, like, you have to have kind of deadlines. You have to have a reason to get out of bed in the morning, get dressed, and all the kind of things, and get out there, because it can be definitely, especially I think if anything like the pandemic for a lot of musicians was kind of a slap in the face.
Oh my God, yeah.
Especially those of us who are out there gigging all the time, and then suddenly you had to like find a different way of still being creative and getting your music out there. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of like always like a seasonal thing, but I know what you mean. It's kind of like settling back into the flow of kind of, okay, I have to stay inside and do some work now, and versus gigging is a much more social kind of situation. You're kind of always sort of activated,
It's a mental shift for sure.
Yeah.
Just to especially going between sort of like touring and then like I like to think that there's the touring side, then there's the freelance side, and then there's the sort of creative side.
Yeah.
And touring is a ton of fun, but is a lot of work in the sense of you're in a different city every day. You are driving for hours on end. It's usually a lifestyle of, wake up, get in the van, drive to a city, sound check, play a show. You're hanging out at a bar, so you're probably drinking and stuff. And then you go to bed at whatever hour of the night, wake up the next morning, get back into the van and do it all over again.
Yeah.
And so it's really taxing, I think, on a physical level.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas mentally, though, you can kind of shut off because you're playing the same set every night.
Yeah.
You're you know what you're doing. You don't need to figure anything out. You're just going, okay, I'm going to show up in whatever city we're in.
Yeah.
I'm going to do what I'm doing, and then I'm going to do it again tomorrow.
So sort of adrenaline kicks in. And
the
muscle
adrenaline,
memory. Yeah.
muscle memory,
Yeah.
and adrenaline, but also taxing on the body because you're it's a lot of travel. It's a lot of you're playing every single night.
Yeah.
The freelance side of things is, I think, maybe a little more mentally stimulating because you're usually working with different people all the time.
That's
you have to
true.
learn.
Yeah, sure.
You have to learn new material.
Yeah.
You have to sort of work in that end of things, and then the creative side where you are working on your own music and you're creating your own stuff. It's not as taxing physically, but you need to force yourself to stay home and work. And I'm a super social guy, so I always need to give myself little incentives like, hey man, if you can finish this chart tonight, then you can go out for a beer with your friend.
Yes.
But you have to finish the chart.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but then that side of things is really, really nice, sort of intellectually and emotionally. That's really stimulating because you're really working on your art. You're really finding out who you are, like where's your voice as a music creator.
Of course, yeah. And after all that too, like we're saying, you also have to be a person and find time, for the other relationships and other parts of your personality that actually feed into your creativity and your musical life as well. So that's sort of the great balance that we're all trying to achieve, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. That whole as I get older, I keep thinking about people are talking about your work-life balance, and I'm like, right, that is a thing.
Yeah.
You can't just do music all the time.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, it I guess the other part of that is, like you said, it sort of makes you a better person, better musician as well, right? And down the road.
Yeah,
Mike, I know you have this big show coming up with Space Elevator.
Yes,
I do want to talk about the show, all the different moving parts, and your various hats you're wearing for that. But first of all, I'd like to talk about the band itself. When you officially formed the band, if it's original members, are there co-collaborators? Do you write all the music? Tell us about the origins of Space Elevator, please.
Space Elevator is a 20-piece band that sort of, it's like my brainchild that's a mixture of sort of big band jazz and like progressive metal, I guess. It's kind of the band that I just throw everything into as far as what I can do as a musician, as a composer, as a producer, as a band leader. I remember I officially started it in 2016. And as a bit of an offshoot from a couple pieces I'd written for my graduation recital out of CAP. I graduated in 2014. I had a couple pieces that were just for a over-the-top large ensemble because you're in music school and you just have a huge amount of talented people who are willing to put in a bunch of hours into your music and stuff. So I took advantage of that, had a couple pieces for like I think it was a 25 piece band at that point. So I scaled it down when I wanted to do it outside of music school, just to a 20 person band, at the request of a dear friend of mine, Max Lee, who is a great drummer around town. And he basically was telling me, hey man, you've got like 3 pieces for sort of this big band setup. If you just wrote a few more, maybe like 2 or 3 more, you could totally put on a concert of this music. And I said, I don't know, man, that sounds like a lot of work. I don't really want to do that. And he said, no, you should. So I kind of hummed and hawed, and then was sort of tinkering away with a few ideas. And eventually I sort of had enough music together that I said, okay, maybe I should do this. Maybe I should commit to this and put on a big band concert. And I remember it was so much work. And I remember every day, my girlfriend at the time, she would come home and I would have some new fear about this concert that I was working. And the first day I was saying, oh man, what if I put all this work into it and no one shows up? And she says, no, it'll be fine. People are going to show up. And I said, okay. And then, working. Next day she comes home. I say, hey, what if I put all this work into it and people show up to this concert and they hate it? What if the music is too weird? What if no one likes it? And she says, people are going to like it. It's going to be fine. I say, okay, all right. And I'm working. And I remember my ultimate fear with this group was what I eventually settled on for my biggest fear about this first initial Space Elevator concert is, what if I do the concert, it goes really well, a bunch of people show up, they all really like it, and then I become the big band guy, and every time that I want to express myself musically, it means I need to throw a big band concert, because that's going to be way too much work. And, the rest is history. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Our first show was at the Fox Cabaret, and somehow it was a sellout show for our very first concert, which was amazing. I'm super grateful that people showed up and enjoy that music and enjoy that band. But it also means that every time, now people are always going, Mike, when's the next Space Elevator concert? When's the next Space Elevator concert?
Yeah.
And I mean, I love it because I'm happy that people want to hear the music. At the same time, every time there's a Space Elevator concert, it's like 4 or 5 months of work for me.
Yeah.
Just, arranging all the music for a 20-person ensemble, promoting all of it because I need to pay everyone on stage.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword, I think, which is like anything in sort of the freelance world, in the music world, is you're going to have to work if you want it to be worth it.
For sure.
So I've been working with that band now for a few years. It's just entirely my own compositions and arrangements, and there's no real theme to it or anything outside of just whatever I'm feeling in the moment. So a lot of the original music is this kind of mashup of genres and styles and sounds, and then we've done covers of classical pieces. We've done covers of post-rock bands. We've done covers of just straight up blueses and things like that. So it's really all over the place, but it all kind of works under the umbrella of this big a bunch of horns and 2 full drum kits and synthesizers and guitars, and it all just kind of melds together somehow. And I've got an incredible cast of incredibly talented musicians that I cannot sing their praises loudly enough, because the amount of ridiculous things that I've asked these people to do and honestly for usually way less money than I should be paying them.
Sure.
but somehow I'll squeeze 20 people on stage. They'll play a bunch of stupidly intricate music, and I'll give them $100 at the end of the night, and they're like, "Oh, thanks, man, that was a ton of fun." I'm going, "I'm so sorry that this is all I can pay you."
But we both know as people who are in the gigging market also, like, you look forward to these kinds of gigs that are actually very fun to play, where you're going to get an audience turnout.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some, considerable showmanship, and I know you guys dress up and do a lot of, like the lighting and the showmanship element is pretty high level kind of stuff. So I guess it's like maintaining your core musician group through the years as well.
I try to keep as many of the same people as possible. Obviously, with a group of 20 people, there's going to be, sometimes people are busy on a given night, or some people leave town or whatever, and so there's going to be some turnover. But I try to keep a lot of the same people, just because I think core component to the composition process is knowing who you're writing for. I know that I can give something to my bass player, and I'll be able to give them a certain type of prompt stylistically, and they'll be able to pick it up. If I can say, "Hey, play this riff like it's a Meshuggah thing," and they'll understand what that means. Whereas not every bass player would understand what a Meshuggah riff is supposed to sound like.
Yeah, of course.
And so I think knowing who you're working with, knowing who you're writing for, is really important. So because of that, I try to keep the personnel in the band as solid as possible.
Yeah, for sure. Funny you mentioned Meshuggah and progressive metal and modern metal, because I did kind of want to sidetrack about that a little bit, because I know it's a big part of your life and my early musical life as well. And I clearly remember the early Meshuggah records in the 90s in the kind of in the Scandinavian scene that was coming out. They were very, they had a sound that was very well defined, and they'd put out so many great albums. And I don't think anybody would have predicted that this whole kind of generation and this and maybe we're kind of moving past it now, but the last 10 years of progressive metal had so much influence from Meshuggah and that kind of chugging, hyper-rhythmic, polyrhythmic kind of stuff going on. But that's a part of your sound, and you kind of listen to a lot of that early kind of hard rock and death metal and Swedish metal music, I suppose. Yeah.
And I've heard from multiple people that and I think it's probably true, that Meshuggah is sort of like the jazz musician's heavy metal band.
Oh, totally.
All of my jazz friends, whenever they list the one, metal band they're into, it's always Meshuggah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just it's got the rhythmic complexity that I think is really appealing to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
And you can sort of you can get past sort of the abrasive sounds and just appreciate the rhythmic element of it, because I know
100%,
that can be a bit of a turnoff for a lot of people, just the screaming vocals and the loud
the vocals
guitars.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of dynamics. And I think what Space Outlaw does very well, and you do very well, is weaving all these influences in your music as colors and references, and as really kind of part of a more elaborate web, right? Whereas I think some people kind of hear metal, and like you said, it can be sort of two-dimensional and sort of one-dimensional maybe in its approach, and kind of always at that dynamic kind of maximum. And I think what Meshuggah also did super well was, like, compositionally, I think that at the end of the day, they're just very good songs, and the arrangements are very good as well. And I think some of the kind of later gent stuff, it kind of dwelled on this kind of superficial level of, like, the complex rhythms and the interlocking kind of like the chugging, and the double kick and that's always at sort of like the forefront of the sound, but there's a lot more, within the compositions and the arrangements and certainly in the level of musicianship and the interplay of the musicians themselves.
Well, and those guys also, they have a lot of influences outside of just your standard heavy metal. Like, I know their lead guitar player is a huge fan of Alan Holdsworth.
Sure.
Who is this insane sort of jazz fusion guitar player.
Amazing. Yeah, nobody really could sound like Holdsworth, but he was just such a huge influence. I remember, I don't know if you remember this band Cynic. They actually got back together kind of somewhat recently. But their sound in the early 90s, they really stuck out in the Florida death metal scene. And they actually, like, two of the guys played on Death's Human record, and they were kind of like in, very accomplished thrash metal players. But they had gone to, jazz school, and they'd really kind of learned Matheny licks, like note for note, and Holdsworth certainly, and kind of woven that in. The bass player was playing the Chapman stick, and there's all kinds of weird metric, polyrhythmic kind of like psychedelic stuff going on, And that's always kind of what I think is sort of like the groups that really, stick out and make a mark, is sort of like actually taking the language forward, like kind of moving it forward, still kind of like nodding to the influences of the past,
Yeah, taking an idea and then saying, okay, what else can we do with this?
Exactly. Yeah. So tell us about the show coming up in March, Mike. You've been putting some late night hours into this.
Oh my God, yes. I have been getting very, very little sleep. And any of my friends that are talking to me lately, they're just going, man, do you ever sleep? And I'm just, the answer is always no. March 23rd, I'm going to be putting on a concert at the Rio Theater with my group Space Elevator. And I'm using this concert as almost a celebration of the incredible wealth of music that we have in Vancouver. Sort of going back to what I was talking about earlier, where I would go to these shows as a kid and it would be like a punk band and then a ska band and then a metal band and then a poet and just these weird mashups of styles, which is just a thing that's really exciting to me. And then sort of pairing that with my work as a freelance musician, where I've worked with so many different groups across so many different styles. And I really wanted to sort of take all of that and kind of just shine a light on it. So I'm taking a bunch of music from some of my favorite local artists across a huge variety of styles, and arranging their music to be performed by my group, and then getting the singers and front people of those bands to then come and sing. So it would be taking a song from, let's say, this local sort of funk rock band called Rain City, taking one of their songs and arranging it for Space Elevator in our typical kind of like jazz rock style, and then getting the two singers of that band to then come up on stage with us and perform with us.
Nice.
So I'm doing that with, it's all over the place. I've got Missy D, who's an incredible rapper and singer. I've got Don Pemberton, who is a local legend of soul and R&B singer. Yeah. I've got Lita from the Hallowed Catharsis, which is this local sort of technical death metal band. I've got the singer from Ninja Spy. I've got Cobra Ramon, Leo D.E. Johnson from Old Soul Rebel and High Society. I've got Teo and Tom from Five Alarm Funk.
Nice.
It's all over the place. It's just going to be a night of, here's a rock song, here's a hip hop song, here's a funk song, here's one of our weird jazz original pieces. Just really, for me, I think one of the coolest things about being a musician is being able to experience so many different types of music, so many different just musical worlds. Totally. And I really want to celebrate that. Yeah. And I mean, also, it's a bit of a shameless, promotion for my gig and for my band, where I can say, hey, all these famous singers, but come hear my weird jazz band.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Bit of a shameless publicity stunt. But I mean, what concert isn't a publicity stunt in some form?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we do have to promote, and and I think it's a great service to shine the light on the diversity and all the kind of the amazing musicians we have here in Vancouver.
Yeah, I'm really lucky. I have felt, just through the organization of this whole thing, I have felt so lucky to be able to work with all these people. Honestly, a lot of these artists, a lot of these guests that are going to be performing with us, I just revere. I look at these people and they are legends within the Vancouver scene. Some of these groups that we're working with, were and still are huge influences on me as a musician, and I feel so lucky to be able to not only work with them, but just to call them peers and to call them friends, and to be able to share a stage with these people that I remember staring up at and going, oh my God, you're like a god to me. Yeah. And now working with them and saying, hey, so how do you like this version of your song that I created? And do you want to come sing it with us?
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Look forward to the show, Mike. And just lastly, remind us the date again, in March.
It's going to be March 23rd at the Rio Theater. I'm sure you can go to my website to
Absolutely.
find tickets and stuff.
Yeah, we'll post a link also in the description of this podcast.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your time today, Mike.
Thank you so much.
Kind of sitting down, getting to know you a little bit more. And
yeah, it's great.
I really look forward to hearing all your projects coming down the road with the composition. Hopefully we can play together sometime in the future.
Yeah, let's do that. And I look forward to hearing your stuff coming down the pipeline.
Thanks, man.
We'll switch seats. I'll interview you next.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Okay.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks again, Mike.
Thank you so much.